So again, big long title. It's actually not the title I sent in to Haley, but she wouldn't allow me to use this title. So here we go. How about that title? There we go. That's the one where Container Apps is awesome. And that's me over there, Big Morty. I don't quite look like that, but I'm good looking like that picture shows. So anyways, Azure Container Apps. If you haven't used Azure Container Apps before, it's a great serverless environment or service to run your containers. We really are great for microservices, but we do support a number of other payloads, and I'll go over those. It's built on modern apps and open source to make sure you're building those cloud native apps with modern services. And it really allows you to focus on the apps rather than the infrastructure. You're not having to manage a Kubernetes cluster. It really takes a lot of the burden from doing that without giving up the power to be able to scale and run lots of apps and instances of those apps, what we call replicas. And we use Kata to scale dynamically based on events, whether that's HTTP events, based on your CPU and memory, pretty much any Kata scaler we support. And then here's a list of some other things we use. Envoy for our Ingress, and Dapper, of course, is built into the platform. Don't have to install anything. You don't have to use it, but it's there for you to use, which is a great runtime. It's a distributed application runtime. Makes it really easy to build your microservices. And of course, we're completely based on Kubernetes. Under the covers, we're using a lot of that technology. I mentioned you can build microservices. We're really great at that. You can deploy 1, 2, 5, whatever number, 100 microservices. You'll deploy those inside of what we call an environment. I'll touch on that in a minute. And they can automatically talk to each other if they want to. They're all in a secured VNet. So there's a great way to run your microservices. That said, we do support just all your APIs. So any APIs that you want to run, it says public APIs here, but you can secure APIs also. You can put other Microsoft services, front door, things like that in front of Azure Container Apps to regulate some of that traffic that's coming in. Of course, we support web apps also. Event-driven processing is really popular, where you're pulling things off of a queue. And then, of course, background processing. And we're working on some big improvements to that are coming out soon. So stay tuned for that. Okay, I only have like 1 or 2 more slides. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. You can always come back and reference this slide. I'm sure Haley will figure out a way to share all the slides, excuse me, with everyone. So I mentioned that environment. It's that virtual network boundary where all of your apps run within. You can, of course, have multiple environments, and it's very common to have maybe a developer, a test, and a prod environment, or maybe even more. And then you'll deploy all of your apps into that environment or environments. As it shows here, each app can have 1 or more revisions. We default you to single revision mode, where you just have 1 revision that replaces itself all the time whenever you deploy it or update it. But you can have multiple, which allows some cool things like traffic sharing or traffic splitting. If you want to do maybe a canary deployment, that's a great way to use a multi-revision. Put out a second revision, maybe send 5% of the traffic there. We use Envoy again that does that. And then move the traffic over as you feel good about it. Each revision can have what we call replicas. Those are instances of your app, basically, of your application code, which is made up of 1 or more containers. Typically, it's a single container. You can have what we call sidecar containers. If you have maybe a logging or an authentication custom thing that you need to go along with your main container, but more often than not, you're just going to have a single container that makes up your app. Now, there are other system level things such as Dapper and some of our system services, let's call them, that we actually use sidecar containers for. But you as the developer typically will just have the 1 container. All right, and with that, I'm going to pause just to make sure everything's good. Okay, Haley, I don't see any crazy questions there. I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio, and we'll take a peek at what Visual Studio can do and help you get started with Azure Container Apps. Here I have opened up a real simple API app. It literally has just this one main method here, excuse me, which is the /albums. And then all it does is it comes down here and returns a static list of albums, titles and authors or artists, and price and a link to the logo. So real simple API. It's a great thing for demoing here. What you'll see over here on the right, and this came from GitHub, by the way, and the reason I mentioned that, I'll touch on that in a moment. But over here on the right, you'll see I don't have a Docker file. So all I've done is I've said file new, added a little code to my API, and now I'd like to publish it to Container Apps. And it's very easy to do that first publish up to Container Apps. I'm going to right click on the project. I'm going to click publish. And we're going to present you with a wizard that you've probably seen if you're a .NET Visual Studio user. And I'm going to choose Azure, and I'm going to choose Azure Container Apps here at the top. And then I'm going to select either an existing container app that I'd like to update with this code, or I can create a new container app. So let's create a new container app. And with this a little easier name to read, I'll name this -VS. And I am going to put it into that same resource group that works. And I already have an environment here. If you take a peek here, you can see that I have an existing env. I did that just to speed this this process up so we can get up to the portal and look at some of the great ways that you can diagnose and monitor your app. So if I needed to, I could create a new resource group right here. If I didn't have one, I could create a new environment right here, just right within Visual Studio. If I didn't have one, we'll use the ones I have. And then this last one, this is the container name. So remember, you could have multiple containers in your container app. Typically, you're just gonna have your main container. So I usually just call this main. You can name it whatever you want. And I'll go ahead and create that. Now, hopefully the people running the demo behind the scenes, that would be Azure, will create this container up fairly quickly. It usually takes 20 to 30 seconds. We have a backup plan though. If this takes more than a few seconds, I'll use an existing app that I've already created. But I have a feeling this is about to finish. All right. Haley, are you pedaling faster? Could you pedal faster?
I am doing my best.
All righty.
While we're waiting, can we see what's the repo URL?
I will show you that in a moment. I can't. Actually, you know, I have that. No, I have that right here. Actually, I don't know if it's public, to be honest, but if not, if it is, yes, it is. Big Morty albums, and so feel free to go up there on GitHub /BigMorty/albums. Good question.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike.
So here we just created that container app. So the app has actually been created in that environment up in the container app service. I'm going to click next. And this is where we're going to pick a Azure Container Registry to store the image that's going to be built. If I don't have one of those, I can also create one of those right here within Visual Studio. So with this process, you can create all of the pieces that you need up in Azure to get started. So it's really easy. I'm going to go ahead and choose, you can probably guess, this .NET Day ACR, which I also created yesterday. And then the last couple questions, these are really interesting. I mentioned earlier, I don't have a Docker file, and I don't even have to have Docker desktop installed if I'm not doing interactive local debugging. I can just ask .NET SDK to build an image for me, and it will do that, again, without Docker desktop and without a Docker file. So you don't have to be a container expert to get started. I can choose to use Docker desktop if I want to. I would need a Docker file. I don't have one, so we'll choose that. And then lastly, because this project came from GitHub, I'm actually going to have a choice here. I have a choice to publish this interactively, which is what we're going to do here in a minute. Or I can have Visual Studio create a GitHub Actions workflow up in my GitHub repository. And by default, it's going to run that workflow every time I commit and push up a new change. So typically what I do is I do my first publish or two with a really basic app, just kind of the bare bones of the app. And then I'll come in here and I'll generate a CI/CD workflow. And from that point on, excuse me, I will just, I'll just push up my changes each time, and GitHub will take care of building the image and deploying it into my Azure Container App environment. So we'll go ahead and choose that, hit finish. It's creating a profile right here. Visual Studio works with published profiles, which is really handy because the next time if I wanted to do an interactive publish from Visual Studio, I wouldn't need to go through all of these steps. What I'll have is I'll have a publish file, a published profile, and I'll be able to come straight to this next screen that is going to show up any moment. My machine might be chugging along, but anyways, so there's going to be a screen that comes up in a moment. I'll have a big publish button, big, but it is there. All I need to do now is click this, but with the speed, and then, like I said, on future publish actions, I'll come right to this screen and just hit one button. I'm not going to hit that button because I know that can take a bit, even when my machine is running wonderfully. So what I did yesterday is I created not only that environment. So here we are up in the portal. I created this environment here, and I actually deployed the exact code studio using .NET to build that image. I didn't use Docker Desktop or Docker file, so the exact same scenario. And you will see I have an app here. So this is the app that I deployed yesterday. This is actually the app that we just created. And when an app is created, you have to give it some image. So what Visual Studio does is it gives it the quick start image. And so I actually have a running app that we created from within Visual Studio, but it's not the app with the code I wanted because I didn't hit that publish button. But I did do that yesterday to the other app. We'll go back to that list and we'll go into the Album API app. And here is the Album API code, and we'll just click on the URL up here. This is the application URL. Holler if you can't see anything, and I'll definitely zoom in as needed. And then, of course, you'll also see here's that environment that I just didn't mean to scratch up. I'll go ahead and click on the application URL, and it's going to fire up that application. It actually did a cold start on that app, and if we have time towards the end, we can talk about the different scaling philosophies that you can use inside of Azure Container Apps. But that's why it took a second or two. It needed to pull the image from my ACR. It needed to spin up the app, and before it was ready. And so it took a couple seconds. You have options. You don't have to let it go into that cold start state if you don't want to. And there we go. We have our albums that have come back. So that's how easy it was to get started in Visual Studio. Took my file, new API code, added maybe 10, 12 lines of code, right-click, publish. .NET did all the work for me to build the image, push the image to my container registry up in Azure, and then deployed it to Visual Studio. I'm sorry, deployed it to Azure Container Apps, and here we go. Here's some great albums. I mean, who doesn't? Oh, this is one of my favorites right here. You, Me, and an App ID. Famous artist at Dapper Eyes. So yeah, we got some great albums coming back here. Okay, back to how I can now. So we've done the build and publish using Visual Studio, and now the second part of the session is going to be more around how do I monitor and diagnose. So keep an eye on my app. How's it running? What kind of resources is it using? And also when I think or when I run into problems, how do I diagnose that? So we have a lot of great things we can do over here. I'm going to skip this whole section here, but you can see this is where you can come to set up authentication, define secrets, set up your Ingress, which by default, I will click on this. I set this up when I deployed this to enable Ingress from anywhere. You can have other options, such as if you only want this to be able, this URL to be able to be hit from within the container environment, like from an app to another app in a microservice way, you can limit that. You can choose your protocol, HTTP or TCP. You can even choose your transport if you want, but auto usually works because it'll detect, and so on and so forth. I won't read all these. Obviously, you have your target port. That's the port inside of your container that your app is listening for traffic. And we now support session affinity, and we can even restrict. So that's an important one. Ingress has a lot of options. What I want to do is I want to jump down, excuse me. And you can see, I mentioned that multi-revision versus single revision. By default, we are in single revision mode. That's really easy to change. If I want to, I just click on the pencil, click to multiple, and then apply. I'm not going to do that. It only takes 5 or 10 seconds. You can see I have that one. I have one revision deployed, and it's getting all the traffic over here. If I had multiple revisions, I could split that traffic however I wanted to in 1% increments. Here's the container that I defined. By default, actually, I raised this. I did a deployment on top of the first deployment and raised the CPU and memory to 1.5 and 3 gig of memory. But you can come here and you can look at your health probes and stuff like that in your environment variables. And then scale and replica. This is really interesting and powerful. The default, I believe, when Visual Studio creates an app is a min and max of 1. But then you can come in and change this to whatever you want. I've actually allowed it to scale to 0, which means after 5 or 6 minutes, if it doesn't have any traffic, it's actually scale to 0, and it will cost me nothing. When I'm using the consumption plan in container apps, and it'll cost me nothing if it scales to 0. But it also can scale up to 20 different replicas if I get a lot of traffic going there. And actually, we probably still have one replica running, because I went over here and was hitting this. So I'll actually click a few more times just to keep that alive. And so down here, this is where we get into, actually, this will be fun. Let's go to logs. So here we are. I didn't want logs. I wanted log stream, actually. Log stream is your real-time logs that you can view. So here we go. We're connected by default. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this window over here. Let's make that a little smaller. And then we'll go back to our log stream. I'll go ahead and clear this log stream. And then I'll come back to here and I'll just hit refresh a few times on this. Boop, boop. You can see every time I hit F5 over here, this spins and I get more logs. So this is a great way to interactively look at your logs. Again, these are your real-time logs that are coming out. I can look at both my console logs. I can also switch to system logs. I have a feeling someone has got a hold of my URL and is having fun with me because I'm seeing a lot of logs come by, and that's fine. You want to scale up. I think that's your aim. Go ahead, keep going. We'll see that scale up if enough of you hit that. But while we're waiting for that fun, you'll actually see here where I get system logs. These are log messages that are coming out of the container app system itself. And so you can look at both of those really easily. If I have multiple replicas, which we can also see that here, I bet we have more than one. We still only have one because people can't hit F5 fast enough. Yes, I dare you. Spend my money. Come on, let's get that to scale up to at least 20 replicas. As we can see, we're still at 1. So one way to measure that. So I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. Logs is a great way. I'm running out of time, so I got to hurry. We also, our log stream, logs is another great way to look at your logs further back. So this will let you look back in history at your logs. What you want to do that is come down here. Here's your console logs. I can just run the simplest of queries, which is give me all my logs. And now I can see those, I'll see those logs come up. It's the same logs. It's just these can go back days and days and days where your log stream isn't going to go back as far. It's only going to hold a certain number of megabytes of logs. This is running a little slow. So what I can do is I can actually say, let's just look for the last 30 minutes. And you can build these queries to only look at certain columns. You can see each of these console logs and system logs have certain columns that you can select. We're not going to wait for this because we're running out of time. So I covered log stream, logs. I also want to point out console. This is don't want to save that query. This is really powerful also. We're still at 1 replica, by the way, folks. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe people weren't hitting it. But I can choose the replica, and I can even change the container. So if I have more than 1 container, like if I had my own sidecar, or if I'm using Dapper, Dapper would show here too. And I can actually connect using a shell or bash or something custom. It has to be a shell that exists. I apologize, just getting over cold. That exists inside of your container. We'll go ahead and connect here. And this is going to connect to that running container up in Azure, and it is. And I can do simple command here. I can ls to see all of the files. If I wanted to, I could even cat the app settings.json file just to show you. So whatever you need to do here, you have a console connected to it, and you can have at it. Okay, lastly, let's see if we have gotten more scale going on our replicas. And we're still at just 1. Okay. Another way to look at that is I can come here to metrics, and I can look at my replica count, and I can say, show me my replica count. There we go. In fact, I'll tighten that up to just the last 30 minutes. And we can see how my replica went from 0 to 1, and it stayed at 1 because we have enough stuff keeping it busy. If there were no requests again, it would scale to 0 after about 5 or 6 minutes. There are many other metrics if you want to look at maybe your reserved cores. So how many cores am I actually using? And if you remember, I set this to 1.5 for each replica. If we did go to a second replica, my reserved cores would go up to 3 because I'd have two replicas going. So again, lots of things here. You can actually generate alert rules. So when certain conditions are hit, you'll get an alert. You can do that for querying of your logs also. So alerts is another great thing that you can do. All right, we're running out of time. I know I'm supposed to save 5 minutes, and I will save at least a couple, 2 or 3 minutes for questions. One thing I wanted to do, actually, Haley, I'm gonna ask you, are there any burning questions there that maybe I can answer by showing something in the portal?
So the question we have on deck here is a container app versus web app. So I say you show what you're going to show, and we can touch on that if we have extra time here.
Okay, and that is a great question.
It is,
and it's actually not the easiest to answer. Well, I'll tell you what. If you're looking to build microservices, I think first of all, if you're using containers to solve your problem and to run your payloads up in the cloud, Container Apps is a great place. If you're not using containers and you just want to hand code to a Azure service, App Service offers a great way to run your code, which doesn't have to be containerized. For web apps and APIs, they do a great job doing that. But again, if you're containerized, especially if you're a microservice, based solution, where you want to deploy multiple apps closely, tightly knit together so they can call each other really easily. If you want to take advantage of built-in Dapper or the scaling using any of the Kata scaling rules, and of course built on top of a lot of open source projects like Kubernetes and and some of the others I listed. That's where Container Apps is great. We actually have an article up here. I just switched over to the learn.microsoft.com. We actually have a compare container options. It touches on what I just said, but you can come here and read about, when container apps and when some of these other things. So head up to the documentation and hopefully that will help. I did want to show if I needed to change any of this, I could go and submit YAML or ARM or use the CLI, or I could come to the portal. And this is where I could easily change or update maybe. Let's say I wanted to update my image. I could click on that main container. And now I can pick a different image rather than my album API, or more likely, probably just a different tag. So I could switch to a different image or tag from either ACR or Docker Hub or MCR or any Docker Hub-like registry that we can access or that you can access. I can also change the CPU and the core. You'll see here I have an environment variable. I could just create a second one, And I can pull those either from a secret or a manual entry. I'm showing you this because .NET developers love their environment variables. I'd actually say all developers do. So this is a really easy way to put in a variable or change the value of an environment variable. What do we want here? We're just going to use Haley. Why not, right? We'll put Haley there. What else can I do here real quick? We can define health probes. So I can come here and I can use a liveness probe. Actually, yesterday when I was testing, I went ahead and did that. I didn't set the path, but I could set the path because if you happen to see in my code, I actually have a couple of health endpoints. I have a health good that returns right away, and I have a health slow that takes, it looks like 60 seconds to return. So I could go and I could put health good right here. I'm not going to do that because I'm going to hit publish and it'll probably break. But anyways, I'm going to save that. I think the only change I made was to add an environment variable, but I can also come here to scale and say, you know what? I want to make sure there's always at least one running, one replica, and I want to go all the way up to 30. And by the way, this max number is going to change really soon. That was a horrible. It was supposed to be this. And actually, it was supposed to be this, I think. That's going to change to a much larger number. And so you can scale to massive numbers of replicas. Okay, we've made some changes here. I'm just going to hit create. And this is going to create a second revision. Remember, I'm in single revision mode, so it's going to replace the existing revision. Whoa, wait a minute. I have two revisions. I'm in single revision mode. Why did that happen? I don't know why that happened either. But actually, that was expected to have two revisions because what it's doing is something we call zero-downtime deployment. It's actually spinning up that new revision. It's pulling down the image, spinning it up, and actually running all the health probes. Once it's happy and that is provisioned successfully and it's hit the liveness and readiness probes, it will then switch the traffic. And that way, no requests are lost in that time between the two replicas. So in about 30, 50 seconds, you'll see this go to 1, and then we'll be running on our new replica, which could be a different image, more CPU memory, whatever. All right, I'm gonna end there unless there's questions that bring us back to the portal. I just wanna say thank you very much. It was a pleasure to present to you. And here are some great resources that you can look up, all the docs, samples, our GitHub page where you can ask questions in the issues list. But we also have a Discord channel, which I try to look at every day. So if you want to just chat with Big Morty, that's me, come on over to our Discord channel.
I will get these links added to the chat so everyone can access them.
Thank you.
I also wanted to mention, so there is a live stream tomorrow. So if you enjoyed hearing from Mike and the Container Apps topics, tomorrow there is a Container Apps. Oh no, sorry, not tomorrow. The 13th is the Container Apps live stream, and then every month it's the first Tuesday of each month at 11 a.m. I believe. And so if you enjoyed Mike's content, we got more of that coming at you.
And do you remember the title of that live stream?
I don't, but I know it's a big one.
It is.
It has
a special topic. It's like, come hear some big announcements that we have. So we have some big announcements. We're releasing some awesome features to public preview in the very near future. So yeah, come join us next Thursday, I believe.
Yes, next Thursday, April 13th. And so you can follow, like, subscribe to the Azure Developers YouTube. That's where you will find all of that content.
And we won't show any of these demos here. They're all new demos, so don't think you'll be bored.
We could never be bored with you, Mike. Never.
Oh, thanks, Haley. So no questions.
I think we just got a fan club for you.
Oh, I don't know about that. Oh, I wish I had a few more minutes because I would show you. I use this cheesy tool called DDoSify, and you're going to kick me off, aren't you? But what I could have done is I could have went here. I'm just not going to have time. Never mind. I won't even take away from Jeff and folks' time.
We can save it for the live stream next week. So this is a teaser that you guys have to join for the live stream next 13th.
No, we have a full other stuff to show you. So I was just going to show you how I can throw 20,000 requests at this endpoint, and we could watch that scale. and I could come to the metrics and watch the replicas go up. It's actually a fun demo, but I think you get it. And if not, reach out to me.
I'm sure everyone will.
Thank you so much, Haley. It's great to see
Mike.
you.